There's so many social issues that we face that by the time the student gets into the classroom, you have to peel back the layers of all the issues that they're facing to get to the math, the science, the English, and the social studies. We have to raise children now before we're able to teach them.
Grading never started. A through F grades didn't start as a way to evaluate learning. A through F grading started as a socioeconomic sorting tool.
My experience in public school was, I guess, kind of like a business relationship. You have your teacher that you see for 1 year, and then you don't see him again, you're done.
Sometimes we attack so quickly on the academics at the very beginning of the school year because we've got so much to cover for the test that we don't take the time to love the child.
The students turned to him and they said, "That's not how you teach. Why are we in these rows being quiet, only looking at you, and you're at the front of the class talking at us? That's not how you teach. We don't like this." And he said, "I know, but that's the way learning is supposed to look. It's what they've come to expect."
In 1821, in the city of Boston, Massachusetts, the first public high school was opened. Now, nearly 200 years after that, there are almost 100,000 public schools across the United States. The creation of the first public school system is perhaps one of America's greatest visions. The idea that every child has access to education free of cost, and through it has the unlimited opportunity to better themselves and fully realize the American dream. But unfortunately, there is mounting evidence today that this dream is no longer being fully realized. A perfect storm of chronic underfunding, economic and racial segregation, and unprecedented changes in the tools of modern learning have created a true crisis in our modern education system. The scope of this problem is troubling indeed.
The landscape is troubling because we still operate a public education system that is not aligned with the realities the students face. And so we're actually delivering services to a population of students in a system that's not aligned with what they deal with each and every day. It's not even aligned with the realities our teachers face. Years ago, when I went to school, and I'm a little older than most, you know, parents sent students to school. We knew why we were there. There was a specific purpose for us being in schools. Teachers were there and they personally took stock of teaching students. When you leave my class, you're gonna know this because I taught you. Teachers today face so many different issues because parenting is not the same. School leaders are not the same. Society is not the same. And so we are working in a system that's no longer aligned with the realities our students face.
I watch kids today and they spin because they're just trying to find worth. I watch them today and they're trying to compete for value, for that elusive self-esteem, instead of that high quality of self-worth. And when we're spinning to try to find an identity that we used to get at home and in the community, a sense of belonging, we could come to school, learn our ABCs, 1, 2s, 3s, how to write, all that, and go home and learn those other things that gave us the ability to walk in with confidence, to walk in with identity, to walk in realizing that I'm valuable, that I have worth, that no matter what happened here at school, my major identity came from my existence outside of the school.
Today's generation of students are unlike any generation we've ever seen before. They face more issues, more problems. And so there are so many social issues that we face, that by the time the student gets into the classroom, you have to peel back the layers of all the issues that they're facing to get to the math, the science, the English, and the social studies. We have to raise children now before we're able to teach them.
Maybe they don't have food at home. Maybe they're not safe at home because they have an abusive parent. No matter what the child's place they originate from, that's where we must teach them from.
In research, it shows late 1950s, early 60s, there were 5 major influences on school-age children in America: home, school, church, peer influence, and television, right? And so the late 1980s, early 90s, that shifted. Those 5 major influences flipped. And today, home is the least of 5 major influences, with multimedia influence being first, peer influence being second, school is third, church is fourth. And so that whole dynamic of who's influencing our children then is directly correlated to the services provided to them.
Well, we flip-flopped it. The major identity of a child now comes from, unfortunately, school or sports or some other extracurricular type activity, and if I'm good enough to be a part of it and if I'm at the top of it.
The public education system is an institution steeped in tradition. Additionally, it is also a bureaucratic institution, and as such is slow to change. But the rest of the world is changing more rapidly than ever before. And today's children, well, they're products of a very new world. As a result of this, many experts believe that today's public education system is using antiquated and increasingly ineffective techniques that are out of step with the realities of our modern students.
There are lots of elements of education that we do because it's the way we've always done them. Grading, for example, may not be the best way to assess learning. And when I say grading, I mean A through F grades. Giving a kid an A and giving a kid a C doesn't give us a lot of information about what's actually known or not known. So when the parent comes in, I say, look, your child can add 2 fractions with a common denominator, but if the 2 fractions have different denominators, they're stuck. So this is what we're going to work on. That gives me so much more information than an A or an F or a C. It's actual knowledge about what my kid does and doesn't know.
So I think it's very important that the schools and the education system try to design themselves in such a way that they allow for children to know that learning is what we're after. Not the grade I'm going to get, not the credit I'm going to get, but what am I going to learn? What do I want to learn? And how do I put things together so that I learn and hold on to it, not just for a test, but for the real situation that is my adulthood that I'm going to be living in for most of my life. A noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. All right, or idea with it.
Grading never started. A through F grades didn't start as a way to evaluate learning. A through F grading started as a socioeconomic sorting tool, so that as a teacher, if I have a lot of kids in front of me, I would put my A students in the front because they have the rich families that I need to please, and I need to look at those kids a lot because they're the kids who might donate to the school or who are more important in my community. And then behind those kids are the B's, and then the C's, and the D's, and the F's, and the F's in the back. I don't really need to pay attention to them because they're not important to me. This comes from a book out of Yale University from the early 1900s about the origins of grading.
We're measured by standardized test scores when, in fact, the things that really matter to the core of a child today can't be measured. You can't measure a child getting up and not feeling like going to school, but they go because there's a caring teacher in that classroom. That's not measured on a standardized test scale. One of the problems with the approach of standardized testing and compliance of those mandates, federal and state, is the fact that we serve such a diverse population of students. We have students who are ready to go to Duke University. I mean, they are sailing. And then we have students who are in the middle, who are students like me. You're average students, you never get in trouble, you do your homework. And then you have the students at the bottom quartile who struggle. We have students who are in second, third grade who are reading on the kindergarten level. And so if there is a federal or state mandate that says that if you are not reading on grade level by the end of third grade, you have to be retained. And so what happens if that child gets to the end of third grade and is not reading? Will you provide more federal dollars for us to reduce class size for that student that you're saying has to be retained? Will you give us resources and money for a summer reading program that we can use for 6 weeks to bring that student up to third grade? You can't just tell public school agencies or systems that this is the bar, hit it or this. You have to say this is the bar, and if it doesn't happen, we will provide additional resources, training, people, manpower to offset those deficiencies.
The way we've always evaluated kids has been through testing them, right? We teach, big test. Teach, big test. No backsies. This is 20% of your grade. Or, for example, for some kids, this is 80% of your grades. That is a terrible way to assess learning. What we know about assessing learning in a way that works is teach a little, quiz a little, teach a little, quiz a little. Low stakes, low pressure, low anxiety, sort of daily quizzing helps. It's called formative assessment, and it helps students understand what they know and don't know, which, by the way, is something we're terrible at. It's called metacognition.
So one of the hard parts about education is getting parents to be comfortable with letting their children fail. Well, if we're identifying their child by the failure, they can't let them fail. If we can simply learn and experience the failure, we're okay, and children can be okay. That's how so much experimentation is made. We find out what not to do again, what not to try again, a different choice, a pitfall to look out for.
I wrote a book called The Gift of Failure, but I don't want children to fail. But what I want is for children to have the opportunity to make mistakes and to have a positive, adaptive response to those mistakes. And that's what formative assessment allows for. It allows children to say, oh, I thought I knew that, but I guess I didn't. Let me go back, or let me admit to that. Let me go to my teacher. The problem is when we do what's that teach, and then have one big test that's worth a lot, that's called cumulative or summative assessment. That kind of assessment teaches kids that you learn a skill and you're done. Or if you didn't learn it, sorry, too bad, we're moving on, and we're just gonna leave you behind.
I want them to know that we're excited about their attempt. Children are not afraid to fail. They are afraid of being identified as failures. Even as adults, if I'm going to try something I'm not comfortable with, I'll do it when no one's around. If I was afraid to fail, I wouldn't even do it when no one was around. I'm afraid of being identified as failures.
What can be a really difficult position for teachers right now is that what looks like good learning isn't always really what's good learning. And when I first became a teacher, I thought that if my students were sitting in rows and they were quiet and they were focused and looking at me all the time, that I was a successful teacher. And the problem is that's not necessarily true.
And oftentimes I say to teachers that if we're paying attention to seat time, which is compliance to state and federal regulations, that we're paying attention to the wrong end of a child.
I was speaking with a teacher recently, and he said their school was being evaluated. And so the evaluators from the state Department of Education were coming in, and they had to make sure that everything was just so they wouldn't lose their accreditation. And so just for these evaluators, he had his students sit in rows, looking at him at the front of the class, learning the way we have come to expect learning should look. And after that evaluator came through the classroom, the students turned to him and they said, that's not how you teach. Why are we in these rows being quiet, only looking at you, and you're at the front of the class talking at us? That's not how you teach. We don't like this. And he said, I know, but that's the way learning is supposed to look. It's what they've come to expect. And in fact, the evidence shows that lecture-based teaching is one of the least effective methods of teaching. It's called sage on the stage. The person standing up in front of the class and downloading their knowledge to the students isn't always effective. In fact, recently a professor of mathematics was talking on Twitter, was tweeting about the fact that he had moved to a more student-led model of teaching. And this is mathematics at an Ivy League university. He was talking about how much more the students were learning in this model of student-led learning. And I was curious, and I happened to be friends with this person, and so I direct messaged him. I, out of the public eye, asked him, yes, this is working great for your students, but how do you like it? How do you like not being that smart guy up on the stage? And he said, I hate it. I love being the smart guy up on the stage. I love the performance. I love having the answers all the time, but I can't deny how much more they're learning when I allow them to take the reins and expand and apply knowledge on their own. I feel like as we move toward more student-led learning, more project-based learning, more opportunities for kids to rely on their own resourcefulness, their own problem-solving abilities, the more we understand that being a good teacher is not standing in front of the classroom and downloading the contents of our brain to these sponges in front of us, that it's about helping them discover knowledge for themselves, helping them parse the knowledge that we have, helping them integrate their knowledge from English and from history and from geometry to complete a story in their head about the evolution of geometry and philosophy and architecture in this world.
Between the lowered expectations that are created by grade inflation and the often unrealistic exceptions created by the pressures of standardized testing, many educators are beginning to ask if there are perhaps more effective ways to both motivate and evaluate student performance. In fact, some institutions are going as far as to remove grading and testing altogether as the driving forces of the classroom and replacing them with a more individual approach.
The Academy for Individual Excellence came to be over a period of time. It wasn't something that was a model that we tried to replicate from some other source. It wasn't something that we sat down on paper and said, this is our goal. But rather, every day we just came to school to work and did what needed to be done and tried to meet the needs of the students that were in our care. Sometimes we attack so quickly on the academics at the very beginning of the school year because we've got so much to cover for the test that we don't take the time to love the child.
I've only attended AIE my entire life, and I'm pretty sure that AIE is the exact same age as I am. So every year that I have a birthday, I'm pretty sure we're both 34. I think that's the way it works out.
One of the things that happened as we were working with these individuals and doing that day by day ended up that we had found that there were individuals who had struggles in education, sometimes with some behavior, sometimes with some ability. And alongside of students who were quite capable academically and were going to be able to achieve a lot of things that would be toward the top end of a spectrum, talking educationally and socially, that we found that those students working together as brothers and sisters and mimicking the concept of family was very effective.
Well, through the whole thing, AIE was family. That would be the #1 thing that I would say. And in a learning environment, and as a kid, you don't realize that what you crave is safety. Safety to be curious, safety to explore, safety to develop yourself. You don't know that's what you want. And I always had that. So I didn't necessarily appreciate it at the time. But now that I have my own children, I do appreciate it because that's what I want for them.
My experience in public school was, I guess, kind of like a business relationship. You have your teacher that you see for 1 year, and then you don't see him again, you're done. So like, it's kind of a strictly teacher-student relationship. And then like some of the classmates you didn't know, you had new ones, you trade out every so often. But this school is different in the fact that almost everybody knows everybody. All the teachers know everybody, you know all the teachers. And when we start little, everybody is been in the same grade with the same like 10 people or so for the past 8 years. So it's like a giant family rather than a teacher-student relationship.
What I'm talking about when we try to mimic family is we try to recreate the opportunities that a child would have on a daily basis in a home. We like our children to be with the same adults for a longer period of time than just a year or two. We like for the children who are in the same classes to travel from year to year, to be able to, once they know strengths and weaknesses of each other's and personalities of each other's, they kind of use their strength for learning instead of adapting all the time.
The most important moments I've had as a teacher aren't necessarily in the daily grind of this skill, that fact, this test result. It's 5 years later when a student comes back to me and said, you know what, I didn't understand what you meant when you taught me that metaphor in Great Expectations. But a little while later, we were reading something else in school, and I said, oh, that's what Mrs. Leahy meant when she was talking about metaphors. Or that's what Mrs. Leahy meant when she said this was something I would need to know down the road. So as a teacher, I have to always think in the long term, not necessarily what do I want my student to know in this moment, but what do I want my student to know in 5 years? And for a long time, I never applied that to my own parenting. But if you think about it, that's what's most important in our parenting too. How I want my child to behave in this moment may not be as important as how I want my child to be and to learn and to comport themselves in 5 years. And if I can get at both, that's perfection. But understanding that both are important is essential to education.
At the Academy for Individual Excellence, our goal is to center on 4 basic principles that I believe will support an adult in a healthy life. Of the 4 pillars that we work with, work ethic, engagement, accountability, and compassion, the work ethic is very strong in its significance. Rather than say everyone do a 10-page report, when I know this child can get a 10-page report done in 3 or 4 hours, and this child would work their entire life and never get a solid 10-page report, I asked for them to work a time limit. I want you to work 10 hours on this. Whatever you produce in 10 hours of good, solid work is going to be sufficient with what we're looking for. And I'm able to thank each one of them for their work ethic, not the product. The idea of accountability as one of the pillars and components for the Academy is that if a child feels like a victim, they immediately do not have to take responsibility. Where I can teach them how to rely on one another in a healthy way and to understand the differences in one another in a healthy way and get rid of that whole idea that fair is everybody's treated the same and come to an early age of understanding that fair is helping individuals in this world get what they need. Compassion's important. We take the children who are really capable academically and we put them in a group so that we can take them on. And so they never live in an environment to where they look at other individuals and truly understand the struggles of other people and how to learn to give and support and have empathy in those situations.
As far as compassion, this is the one that I don't think that I would have learned in another setting. Because I am a perfectionist, I'm a go-getter, I'm a leave everybody behind type of, that was my natural instinct. So the Academy, you don't get to be that. You don't get to leave everybody in your wake as you go do what you want to do. You have to learn patience. You have to learn teamwork. You have to learn to stop and consider and to look over there and to use your gifts that you've been given, not just for yourself. Use your gifts for other people.
This engagement piece is huge because engagement is where we learn. So something as simple as asking a question a different way. Instead of saying, what's the country that is to the north of the United States? Several children may shoot their hand up, know that, they've already processed the question, processed the answer, they're already with you. And if you call on them, the kiddos who are noticing the fly on the wall or hearing the hum of the lights or thinking about the fact that mom and dad had struggled with a little argument before school, those kids are never asked to engage. So if you just change the question slightly and say this instead, raise your hand if you know the country that's north of the United States. Good, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm giving time. I'm acknowledging. And the child who doesn't want their voice heard can still start by learning to be engaged by raising their hand and knowing that I'm waiting for them to let me know. The next question is, who doesn't know? Good, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, we're gonna be able to talk about that now. This is good.
Every year, millions of children and adolescents attend public schools across the United States under the idea that every child has access to education free of charge, and through it has the unlimited opportunity to better themselves and fully realize the American dream. Unfortunately, a perfect storm of economic and racial segregation, chronic underfunding, and unprecedented changes in the tools of modern learning have created a true crisis in our education system. The Foundation for Excellence in Education is dedicated to ignite a movement of reform, state by state, to transform education for the 21st century and has a vision for an education system that maximizes every student's potential for learning and prepares all students for success. For more information on matters in public education, go to excelined.org.
So facing the problems of modern day education, we have to understand that it will require a multifaceted strategy. We need to seriously evaluate long-held traditional methods and see whether they're still effective in teaching modern kids. We need to examine our institutionalized methods of grading and testing and have the courage to modify or even discard these systems where they're proving to be counterproductive. And finally, we as a culture need to place the appropriate value we have with regards to public education and the talented and caring individuals who serve here on the front lines. I'm Kelly Wright, and together, we're taking care of business.
When we value something, we support it. When we value something, we provide resources to that end. And I don't understand, haven't understood for a very long time, how we can, in America, pay athletes millions and millions of dollars to entertain us on basketball courts, football fields, soccer fields, baseball fields, but we undervalue and underpay our teachers so much that they have to go get second jobs to feed their own families. And I think we need to check ourselves in America and do some reflection on what's really important to us.